Good morning. We finished the book of 2 Kings this morning, and as we look at chapters 22 through 25, chapter 22 starts with the reign of King Josiah, and he begins his reign when he's 8 years old, young for a king. But when he's in his 18th year, so he's 26 years old, he sends a messenger to a high priest anyway, and he wants him to count all of the money that's been given for the temple and give all that money to the carpenters, to the woodworkers, to the iron workers, to those that are doing the building, to have them rebuild the temple. And while his messenger is there, the high priest gives to him the book of the law, which is says it's kind of been found. Well, and maybe this high priest knew where this book of the law was, but this book of the law is thought to be the scroll of Deuteronomy. It wasn't a book like we have, but they had a scroll, and Deuteronomy is the second book of the law. And it's it's Exodus and Genesis, Exodus were the giving of the law, and Deuteronomy was kind of the second giving, the second interpretation of the law. It expanded the law a little bit more. But this was the book of the law that was given by the high priest to the messenger of the king. And it was sent back and then read to the king, Josiah, when he was virtually 26 years old. Still pretty young for a king. But he heard the words, and he realized how sinful the Israelites had been and how far they had gone from what God's law was. And this king, even when he was, maybe young, not knowing all of the law, had been more faithful to God than many others. And so it was in verse 8, the high priest says to the messenger, "I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord." And then as we get through more of it, it is read to them. And in chapter 23, it says, "The king directed that all of the elders of Judah and Jerusalem would be gathered." And then in verse 2, he says, he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant. This is the covenant. And in Jeremiah 31, we will hear God say, "I will establish a new covenant with them." The covenant is a promise between God and humankind, and it's an agreement, it's a promise. And this covenant has been perfected by God and kept perfect by God in his faithfulness to his people and his promises to his people, whereas as people, we can't keep that covenant. And the new covenant that is established is the covenant between God and Jesus Christ and you and me. And so we see that, he is, the king reads this book of the covenant, and God says, "If you keep my laws, I will bless you, I will do." And so King Josiah tries to bring the people, at least of Judah, back into the right relationship with God that they should have had. And as he is bringing the people back into this relationship, as we get into chapter 23, especially at verse 21, it says, "The king commanded all the people, keep the Passover of the Lord." This was something that they had forgotten. They had not been doing. And it says in verse 20, "No such Passover had been kept since the days of the judges who judged Israel." So the judges, that was before even King David. So even during King David's reign, they're saying here that the Passover and all the festivals had not been properly followed and kept. And so, but it says, in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was kept to the Lord in Jerusalem. And so he was very diligent and very determined to bring the people back to this right covenant. And as we read on there, it says, "Moreover, he put away the mediums, the wizards, the teraphim, the idols, and all of the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and Jerusalem. And he took the statues of Baal and all of these false gods out of the temple." Think of that. All of some of these idols and stuff were in the temple, the holy temple of God in Jerusalem. But Josiah took them out. But verse 26 says that the Lord did not turn from his wrath against, his anger that was kindled against Judah because of all of the provocations of all of these other kings and all of these other people. But yet because of Josiah, God was faithful in many things. And then Josiah dies, and in verse 31, it says Jehovahs was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he was chosen by the people. I guess that's in verse 30. The people of the land took Jehovahs and made him king. So rather than a priest or a prophet, the people lifted this Jehovahs up. And again, he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He reigned for 3 years, and Pharaoh Necho had come, and he was taken out of the land and done away with, and then Jehoiakim began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, it says. So we continue kind of the saga of all of the kings that came. And then in chapter 24, it says in the days of King Nebuchadnezzar, I stumble on that name sometimes, Nebuchadnezzar, whichever way you've heard it, Jehoiakim, who had been the king, becomes, it says, the servant, for 3 years of King Nebuchadnezzar. And all of these things are happening, and in the first 17 verses of chapter 24, we see the first fall of Jerusalem. It's captured in that, and then when we get into chapter 25, it's the second fall of Jerusalem, the destruction of the wall, the destruction of the temple, the second deportation of the Israelites from the land. There's just the wrath of God is played out against the people of Israel, his chosen people. Jerusalem is besieged and falls to this other king again, and everything is taken away. The bronze pillars that were in the house of the Lord, the stands and the bronze, they carried away to Babylon. They took away the pots, the shovels, the snuffers. Everything was carried away in plunder by these. By the king and by the soldiers that came in, and so that it's just terrible destruction of everything again. And after this has all happened, then this foreign king appoints, in verse 22 of chapter 25, he appointed Gedaliah, son of somebody, as governor over the people. So they no longer have a king. Now they have a governor. And this King of Josiah was around 600 BC. So we're still, 600, maybe 550 years before Christ as we come here. But, in the days of the prophets and the judges, the Israelites cried out for a king. So King Saul was the first king, then King David, then King Solomon. And as much as, Saul had been the first king, God was upset with having made Saul king. David is a very faithful king, and probably, he is lifted up more, and we hear more about him, and other kings are compared to David more than anything. And this King Josiah that brought God and the covenant back to the people is probably, maybe the second greatest king, in the eyes of many of the religious scholars, because of finding the covenant of the law, this scroll of Deuteronomy, as is its thought, and reinstalling the Passover, encouraging people to follow the Passover, to follow the covenant, follow the laws of God. It's just, we see this happening, and then, we had this one more great king that brings about so much good, and then just boom, things fall apart again. And now we're back to a governor. And in Jesus' day, we had a Roman governor that was ruling in Jerusalem and in, the whole area of Judea, of Samaria, of Israel was all ruled by governors of the Roman government. And, and so we find now this governor coming in, and as the rest of the chapter ends up, we find this Jehoiakim, is in exile, and lived out that way. But it's just the saga, the continuing saga, the story of the Israelites, and their unfaithfulness to God. But through it all, God is faithful. Even at the end of the book here, now when they no longer have a king but have a governor, and they have been dispersed, they are scattered out. They're no longer a unified people under God that way. So tomorrow we will begin looking at First Chronicles, and we will find out a lot more about how the Israelites lived, and in so many different ways. Again, today as always, may God bless you.